This is Erica McAndrews from the University of Notre Dame presenting for the Ethical and Professional Issues in Engineering class. The topic of this project is to look at both the benefits and the flaws of the SA 8000 workplace policy, which is a set of standards created to protect workers' rights in workplaces around the world. In recent news, there was a mass fire that broke out in a Pakistani facility, as caused by violations of several safety standards in the SA 8000. This type of disaster could blame the weak inspection system of the SA 8000, which is one of the ethical issues of this topic. Let's begin with what exactly the SA 8000 is. In 1997, an organization called Social Accountability International established a policy that would revolutionize employee rights. Inspired by several conventions made by the International Labour Organization and the United Nations, SAI realized the need for a stricter policy that better protected workers. The Social Accountability 8000, otherwise known as the SA 8000, was created as an international standard targeted towards creating safe, quality, and fair working conditions in all industries. The SAI is an international organization whose mission is to advance and preserve human rights around the world. Before the SA 8000, industries typically maintained their facilities on a checklist-based approach, which wasn't widely enforced. The SA 8000 moved beyond this approach and introduced a more rigorous certification process, which included greater and more fair benefits to workers. This process, although improved from the previous system, still has some flaws in maintaining the standards. Certification only provides a confidence that the facility has the ability to fulfill the standards, but it's impossible to guarantee that these standards are fulfilled all the time, which is one of the issues with this policy. So who actually uses this policy? The SA 8000 is used around the world and provides a basic foundation policy for many facilities. In 2015, 65 different industries were registered with the SA 8000 in 69 different countries. Overall, over 3,500 facilities were certified around the world. This pie chart shows a visual representation of the different global regions that are certified. This chart is also a general representation of where the bulk of facilities are located in the world. Europe and Asia alone make up more than 75% of the certified regions. In the years prior to 1997, the SAI observed many issues in work environments and violations of human rights. Child labor also became a growing issue in many foreign industries. All in all, working conditions were falling short of satisfying employees and maintaining a quality work environment. Conditions include long hours, unsafe work environments, unfair wages, discrimination, and arduous labor, mainly just to increase profitability. The ISO 9000 and 14000 were the policies that were previously used, but did not include performance requirements or workplace requirements. The SA 8000 introduced these requirements to ensure sufficient wages, safe working environments, eliminate child labor, and enforce fair working hours. So who are the stakeholders with this policy? Manufacturers are the major stakeholder, as they are the ones to create the safe working environment, set the fair wages, and employ the policy standards. Manufacturers can be seen as the ones who might get hurt the most by this policy, as maintaining these policies can be difficult and even tedious over time, and can also reduce their profitability. It is tempting for manufacturers to cut corners and violate these standards for various reasons, such as time, budget, and outside pressures, which is where we begin to see some ethical issues in many industries. The most obvious stakeholders of this policy are the workers and employees. They are the ones to directly benefit from this policy, as it purely strives to satisfy their rights and ensure their safety. The SA 8000 itself is quite an extensive outline of conditions and standards that must be met in order to receive certification. One of these requirements is the elimination of child and forced labor. However, even with the direct implication of this in the policy, child labor is still a very prevalent issue around the world today. Statistics have shown that 250 million children between the ages of 5 and 14 are forced into child labor. Asia is host to 61% of these child workers, Africa 32%, and Latin America 7%. However, what is most shocking to see is that child labor is still present in the US. Most of the child labor force is put towards the agricultural industry, such as picking chilies in New Mexico, packing cherries in Washington State, working on construction in New York, and working in sweatshops across the country. In 2011, studies showed that there were almost 300,000 child workers in the US alone, a very shocking statistic. By using so many unpaid child workers, employers across the country saved a total of $155 million. An investigation carried out by the Associated Press and Douglas L. Cruz, a Rutgers University economist, found many mainstream companies involved in employing child workers, such as Costco, Heinz, JCPenney, Pillsbury, Sears, Walmart, and Campbell's Soup Co. Clearly, this is evidence of a great ethical issue, and we can see how SA 8000 certification does not completely fulfill one of its goals to eliminate child labor. Because of the great profit incentive associated with child labor, it is difficult for companies to resist that temptation, especially if child labor is already a part of their production cycle. This issue is a prime example of how the SA 8000 has failed to protect basic human rights and makes us reassess how a problem of such magnitude should be solved. The SA 8000 does not seem to be the most effective way to deal with these issues, so we need to rethink how society should approach these problems. So why is it so hard for companies to follow the rules? Following the SA 8000, many companies have developed their own codes of conduct that promote basic rights and prohibit such practices as child labor and discrimination. So now, hundreds of variations of codes exist, a difficulty imposed on suppliers and creating a very inefficient system. It's difficult for companies to remain responsible for monitoring these codes of conduct, in addition to vouching for working conditions. It is simply overwhelming. With all of its flaws, the SA 8000 has been able to greatly improve the lives of employees around the world. When it was established in 1997, the SA 8000 was the first standard to outline compensation requirements for workers. The policy was the first to ensure fair wages for the appropriate working hours in order to meet basic survival needs. It is the first real implication to address a fair minimum wage that meets living standards. Look at the real-world implications of this policy through a case study disaster. On September 19, 2012, the New York Times published an article describing a factory fire in Karachi, Pakistan, a facility which was wrongly certified for the SA 8000. Inspectors represented by Social Accountability International initially visited the plant to determine if it had met the international standards of the SA 8000. Only weeks after receiving certification from these inspectors, a mass fire broke out in the factory, killing 300 workers. These people were killed because the inspectors failed to realize that there was a lack of exits in case of an emergency. The windows were barred and only one open exit was available. This trapped the workers in the fire and caused them to perish. As quoted by the article, the fact that the factory had been certified by a respected Western organization made clear the failings of a controversial 15-year-old industry initiative. This is only one case example of how the system is flawed in its methods. Through further investigation, a government commission found many violations to the policy in Pakistan's regulatory system, such as corruption, political interference, and poor management. Some safety inspectors stated not knowing the specific rules and regulations of their own department, and admitted that they had formally stopped factory inspections 9 years prior. The Karachi factory also fabricated information, reporting only 250 workers, when in reality up to 1,000 people were working in the factory at one point, posing serious risks and violations. Richard M. Locke, professor of political science at MIT, released a statement for the article. Even after a decade or more of such private monitoring efforts, these programs, no matter how well funded or designed, or how well trained their auditors are, simply do not in and of themselves produce sustained and significant improvements in labor standards in most supply chain factories. The article describes how the tragedy led to a complete review of the SA 8000 policy, and how something like this should be prevented in the future. One such issue is how the inspections were carried out. The initial inspection of the Karachi plant was announced prior, giving the plant managers an ability to prepare the plant for inspection, such as prepare what should be said to the auditor and open exit doors that would otherwise be locked. Some workers are coached to lie about their working conditions, under threat of dismissal, a tactic factories use in order to clear certification. These issues are recurring, not only in Pakistan, but in facilities around the world, and prove that the SA 8000 is an inefficient method in certifying safety standards. The SA 8000 can be considered a good foundation for maintaining a safe workplace. However, we still need to find a more effective system to eliminate the problems that exist throughout the supply chain. Clearly, since these are recurring issues, the SAI needs to seriously reconsider their methods of certifying facilities to prevent such disasters from happening again.